All right. Well, speaking of people who are not likely to be booked anytime in the near or far future ever again on a wrestling program or anywhere else for that, except maybe in jail. Brian, have you seen the documentary on Peacock on Teddy Hart? What is it? Crime, Cons, and Cats?
I have. I watched it actually with several people.
How in the world did this guy think that it was a good idea to let people follow him around with a camera? And that he actually, from what I understand, told his friends to talk to this guy. And so a bunch of them did, but then as this thing went along, and I mean, they tell the whole story. And folks, if you're wondering what we're talking about, apparently some wannabe independent filmmaker or guy wanted to get into reality television or whatever, thought it would be a good idea for a reality television show if you've got Teddy Hart, he's a wrestler, and he breeds cats, and he has a weird life, and, well, this will be reality television. And he starts following Teddy around and shooting him doing different things, and quickly it goes south in that nobody is interested in a reality show about this guy that they've never heard of. But then the filmmaker starts realizing that he's in the middle of something completely different and continues shooting to what has become this documentary of Teddy Hart's meltdown, I guess, of his entire fucking life. Because, I mean, we've talked about, you know, some of the problems he had a few years ago where they arrested him for, you know, something of a parole violation in Richmond, Virginia. And he said, well, he had just gone there to buy weed, but he had wrestled in Washington, D.C. that night, which is 100 miles away. And somehow he needed to drive 100 miles to pick up some weed. I don't know what the fuck. He's been in and out of jail, in and out of parole violations for various things. But now all this stuff has come out in the open that not only has he mistreated, according to what they say, some women that used to live with him, one that was portrayed early on in the program as his wife, later found out maybe ex-partner, but also this Samantha Fiddler, a girl from Canada that wanted to get into wrestling and became one of Teddy Hart's girlfriends, disappeared 5 or 6 years ago and has never been seen again. And not only did he not seem sympathetic, but when they kept asking about her, he's like, fuck her. I don't care what happened. I don't know where she is. I don't have anything to do with this. I mean, there's so many questions. The biggest question right at the top of segment 1, or that's a 3-part documentary, the first part of the documentary. Brian, how the fuck does anybody fall for this guy? Male or female?
You talking about Teddy or the filmmaker?
Yes, Teddy Hart. How does anybody, they talked about how he's so manipulative, and he had people, both the girls and the guy trainees at his wrestling school, fetching and carrying for him and doing chores for him and doing his bidding. And they have this on camera, and then they go out in his backyard, and here he's got this half-ass self-made ring in a backyard of this house that he calls a mansion.
How big was that ring?
What, 12 feet, 14 feet, maybe? Slack ropes, do it yourself. And he's got guys that are paying him $2,000 a month to live at his mansion, which was a suburban, you know, fucking subdivision home in various stages of decomposition on the outside of it, and it's filled on the inside. It's a cool house. He's got all kinds of his weird collectibles, but so I can identify with that. But they're training in a wrestling school in a fucking do-it-yourself ring in this guy's backyard. They're paying him $2,000 a month, and they're doing his fucking chores. And you can't tell, you couldn't tell by just sizing this situation up visually, that what the fuck? And that you couldn't tell that this guy, Teddy Hart, has barely been on television on any wrestling program in the last 10 years or more.
Ever, really, if you think about it.
Well, ever really big time television, but I'm talking about anything. And, you know, MLW was the last place, and then they let him go a time or two. And he was trying apparently to go back there, and I don't think they were real receptive. I'm sure that situation will not change after this documentary, but that's the thing. I was thinking, sitting there, first of all, what's the matter with these guys in this wrestling school? They can't they're adults. They can't figure this out. And then I'm thinking, how the fuck is he getting all these women to do all this shit for him and with him? And the filmmaker at one time was told that he was shooting Teddy's polyamorous lifestyle with his wife and her girlfriend. But then they come back later on and say, no, it was all a bunch of bullshit. And the girl that was supposed to be the girlfriend said, I just met Teddy that day, and they hired me to do this because I thought I'd get on television. And I think obviously there were some drugs involved. So basically you got, a bunch of people hanging around doing his bidding, male and female, for either they think they're going to be on television, they think they're going to be wrestling stars, they think they're going to be reality TV stars, they think they're going to be goddamn whatever. And did we mention also drugs were probably involved? And that's the thing, again, you're looking at it's because Teddy now, he was a good looking kid when he was younger, but now he's early 40s, and he's got the ridiculous dress that he dresses in these wild clothes that he wears everywhere out in public, at the mall where nobody knows who he is.
He called himself a fashion designer.
A fashion designer, yes. I mean, guys have joked about it. He walks around the airports and the malls in these outfits. Nobody knows who the fuck he is, but they think, what the fuck's the matter with that guy? And, and then the thing here's another thing with the Samantha Fiddler, the girl who disappeared. She has 3 kids, and she was in her early 20s. But somehow he convinced her that she should come and train with him, and he'd make her a big-time wrestling star. And she leaves her children with family and goes from Canada to Florida, not even to train at a school that Teddy Hart has, but that, again, now here this fucking slimeball shows up, this Chasen Rance. And I've never actually, as far as I know, seen him or heard him speak. I've heard the name because it's so unusual. And he's the one that old Twinkle Toes, Kenny Olivier, got all the heat for, because he had them provide a show that he was doing a ring. Chasen Rance is some kind of convicted sex offender. And the Team Vision dojo that Teddy Hart sent this girl that disappeared to train to wrestle is owned by him, and has been the place where, how did they phrase that? A bunch of shit happens in that place. And a lot of people cover up knowing who's involved because they're friends of people who may or may not be EVPs in places. So Teddy Hart sends this mother of 3 to a wrestling school 3,000 miles away from her home, run by a sex offender, and then she disappears. And there is Chasen Rance. My God. I mean, he seems sleazy. The nasal voice and the greasy hair and the diminutive frame with the little, beak nose on him. He looks like a little rat. But at the same time, I wonder, how could he make anybody do anything against their will? He looks like he's 3.5 feet tall. But apparently it was underage. So he, whatever's going on there, he wasn't trying to prey on grown adults that could defend themselves. Nevertheless, so we go back to Teddy Hart. Basically, the summation of this whole thing is that Teddy Hart is a manipulative asshole who has mistreated all these people, has a criminal record a mile long, has been involved in a disappearance that nobody can fucking solve, and he's not anxious to try to help anybody. And I don't know. I think Ric Flair in the Dark Side of the Ring Plane Ride from Hell episode came off like goddamn Audie Murphy in World War II compared to Teddy Hart looks like the worst human being in the world for 3 fucking hours of this documentary. And one would have to think that we will never see him in the wrestling business again. Wouldn't you think that?
He could probably get booked in Mexico pretty easily.
And they even talked about the time in Ring of Honor. That was I'm going to say it was the first Ring of Honor show I ever went to. Because they had called me. That was the first night I did something with Bobby Heenan. I believe oh God, it was at the Rexplex or something up there in New Jersey. And the main event that he was in was this big multi-man cage match. And they actually had footage and they talked about it, that Teddy just went into business for himself, which is what he does all the time. And I mean, he's an amazing athlete. And he can work. I saw in 2019, 3 years ago, a couple of matches in MLW where he can work. But he's just, you could tell by this, he's a mental case in that he can't stop talking about himself like he is really a gimmick. He is really a gimmick, but he can't do anything except that. And he does bizarre things that make no sense. So in the Ring of Honor show, he gets up on this huge cage and does a fucking backflipping shooting star press onto a bunch of guys on the floor. And then I've told this story before on the show, it's been a while, but then he got back in the cage and he climbed up again and he did a moonsault off the top of the cage and landed on his feet in the ring. It was goddamn amazing. And then he climbed up the other side and he did the same thing. And then he started moonsaulting and then he has made himself so ill from all this exertion. I swear to God, he climbed the cage and was up over the top of the cage and then just projectile vomited over the top of the cage out onto the front row, and people were ducking and running. And then he turns around so he doesn't vomit on any more of the fans, and he threw up from 20 feet up in the cage, into the ring. And there were still more matches. And they said that CM Punk almost fought him that night, but I remember, and I'm not saying that didn't happen, but I was the one that was holding Samoa Joe back from going to kill him. Because he's got to go out and work in a fucking puke-filled ring now. And he was, what you little fucking prick, what the fuck's the matter with you? And I've got both arms around Samoa Joe's shoulders. I go, Joe, don't kill him. And that actually came up in the locker room in MLW a couple years ago. I didn't bring up that night, but I remember I was there. And I told him, I said, I was hanging off of Samoa Joe. I was afraid he was going to come grab you. And fuck Joe. I'd have kicked the shit out of Samoa Joe. He thinks he's goddamn Teddy Gracie. He literally said that. He said, I'd have fucked Samoa Joe up. Yeah. And then you would have woke up and apologized, you little fucking slime ball. You know, I mean, he's got, and that's the thing. He's not, his real name isn't even Hart, but he is doing more damage to the Hart family legacy than any of the actual real Harts and all of their weirdness. They'd rather have Smith back in his heyday now than have to deal with Teddy.
One of the most amazing moments in the documentary series is when his dad, BJ Annis, talks about, it's the most honest statement ever. He just says, if that girl was my daughter, Teddy would be behind bars. But Teddy's my son, and we got him the best lawyer because we're going to make sure he doesn't go behind bars.
Yeah.
And it was just so cut and dry and so honest. And you know, it's kind of crazy to hear. It's kind of crazy to see Teddy have parents who seem relatively normal considering the time around wrestling they had.
And his mother, Georgia, that's Georgia, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
One of Stu's daughters I mean, she looks almost like, well, you can tell the Hart voice and the Hart smile, and she had a little bit of like, the Hart family women in her as far as just, but she seems normal. BJ Annis, as you said, older man, seems normal, and just, they're sitting there with this delinquent 40-year-old son of theirs in their house dressed like an imbecile and talking about, well, yeah, he's his own worst enemy. He's just kind of fucked up, whatever the fact is. Oh.
The sad thing is he will get booked. I'll promise you he'll get booked, because for the same reason Chasen Rance is still hanging on in wrestling with his whatever those sleazy videos are. Do you think Smoky Mountain could have stayed in business if you had just done underwear videos and Ricky and Robert and sold them to creepy people via mail order?
That's another thing. He actually tried to defend their wrestling school. Basically shoots private videos for people without a crowd in the arena so that they can watch the sweaty men put fucking holds on each other or whatever, however it was. And they showed a clip or two of that. And this is what they're up. So that's a perfect place to send a young, impressionable foreign citizen from Canada into that fucking cesspool.
But look, it's the rare dirtbag who gets busted for everything around wrestling and just disappears forever. It never happens. No one goes away. Everyone hangs on in one way or another, so I'm sure he'll be around. The documentary is interesting in a few respects. The footage is incredible. WWE is a producer on this. Kevin Dunn was executive producer. He's one of the listed executive producers.
Well, and by the way, and Stace said the same thing. She said, Kevin Dunn's name is on this. If the WWE has any involvement in a production for television or streaming or video or whatever, Kevin Dunn's name goes on it, whether he's ever even seen the thing or heard about it. That's part of the deal. I'm not saying he doesn't ever work on anything, but his name is on everything. Sort of like when the art director of MGM was Cedric Gibbons. He had more movie credits than anybody else in the history of Hollywood, but he didn't actually sew every single costume.
But at the end, it felt almost like a WWE thing. The guy basically said, I concluded Teddy had nothing to do with Samantha Fiddler's death. But the whole thing is, like, up to that point, teasing, I think he may have done this. I think he may have done this. At what point also did that guy, and, he's lucky he was able to sell this. At what point did that guy decide he was going to make himself the focus of the whole fucking thing?
Well, yeah.
The people I was watching with here in my house, my family, everyone had the same reaction. This guy's becoming a little much already. It's all about him now.
Well, and when it's all about the filmmaker, but at the same time, there were not a lot of baby faces in this. The filmmaker, Teddy Hart, most people around Teddy Hart, the victims are a different story.
I think Mr. Money was the baby face of the whole thing.
Mr. Money, the cat, was the baby face of the whole thing. But, and here again, folks out there, if you're impressionable and you're looking for something and you don't know what to do with your life, and, something comes along like this for this poor girl that, I can be a big wrestling star, and here's a guy who's a name. Look at it 2 or 3 times. Don't fall for this shit. That's the one thing about Teddy Hart. If you're a normal, well-adjusted fucking person that doesn't believe bullshit, then you would look at him and roll your eyes. But when you confused or disoriented or lost or looking for something, I could see where maybe you would believe some of this shit, but good Lord. Look at what's in front of you.
Will there ever not be a person in Western Canada selling that they could teach you the secrets of the Hart Dungeon? Will that always be a trade for someone?
Well, at some point in 20 or 30 years, maybe that will subside, but...
Hey, was the biggest pop the introduction of the character Bill and then him looking at the camera to try to show off on his ATV and then flipping it over on himself?
Yeah, and we didn't find out what happened to Bill. Actually, he looked more together in his sit-down interview than he did when Teddy Teddy ends up living with some fucking guy named Bill. And
who bailed him out.
who bailed him out of jail. And then Teddy wouldn't leave. Sounded like a Dr. Jerry Graham story. And then they found the guy several years later, and he seemed like maybe he had straightened up whatever was wrong with his life when Teddy was living with him. But I mean, if you just look at this cast of characters involved in this whole thing, you go, why in the world would anybody want to be a part of this or buy any of this pap?
Beyond any of the specific characters, one of the interesting things I wanted to get your perspective on was just the idea that this was a little bit of an exposure about how many fans there are who love wrestling but don't know anything. Anyone who thinks Teddy Hart was going to help their career doesn't know anything, and they're paying him. And even when you saw the training that Samantha Fiddler was allegedly getting at the dojo or the Vision Dojo, whatever the fuck it is, what a stupid name. It looked like she didn't know anything. I mean, she was trying hard, but did they teach her any basics? Or was it just, okay, here's how you run the ropes. All right, you have not mastered that. Let's move on to the next thing. What kind of training are these people? How many people are getting suckered into spending money on being around wrestling or being wrestlers, and they have no chance and they have no clue what's going on?
Well, see, a lot of people forget that, again, there's a ton of people that follow everything on wrestling on Twitter and on the internet and live their life on it and know everybody's ins and outs. And there's a lot of other people who are the people who walked up to Kurt Angle in the airport after he joined TNA and say, hey, what have you been doing since you quit wrestling? Because they don't know. And that's the type of person that gets preyed on. So they get sent down to Team Vision Dojo in Florida so that they can do, it's a fucking private porn studio. And I guess, like I said, this guy books rings and or potentially students out for these outlaw shows that are run by his friends. And he stays back under assumed names or out of the picture or whatever because he's hot, because he's a convicted sex offender, apparently.
Do you think it's a good investment if you're someone who's part of the dregs of society to buy a ring? Because you'll always be able to rent it to someone.
You will always be able to rent it to some low-class goof, yes. And Teddy could have used that ring up in Edmonton or wherever he was then. But anyway, so it's very, I can't say entertaining, it's a very interesting documentary.
The cat juggling, what the fuck was that? I train cats I've never seen anyone else do that. Does anyone else do that?
I don't know if cat juggling is a big... Now, they used to have possum juggling at the Possum Day Parade back in Pixley.
Were there 3 possums, or was it just one you throw in the air and twirl around and catch?
I'm not sure. It depended on the individual possum juggler, but... And the filmmaker thought, this is the real key to this being a reality show. He's a wrestler... And he's weird, but he also juggles cats.
Hey, listen, the filmmaker had some sort of thing going on with cats. He's like, I'm a filmmaker. I do whatever it was, kiddie TV here in Canada. And also, in his office, there were giant pictures of cats everywhere. So, I mean, I don't know what his deal is.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time a little pussy contributed to a man's downfall.
But the cat juggling and the cat breeding. The Rolling Stone article said he was dealing drugs. They never even touched that subject. They stayed completely away from that.
I got news for you. If you're a little 5'6" munchkin like Teddy Hart with no fucking money and no place to live, if there are drugs involved, that's the only way you're going to get these women.
You know how you can tell WWE produced this? They mentioned every single, and I'm not saying, it's probably good that he wasn't mentioned. They mentioned every single nationally known Hart family member except Owen.
And there actually was a picture of Owen on the screen at one point. They didn't even reference him. So, nevertheless, I'm sure none of the Hart family wants to be referenced around Teddy at this point. So, if anybody has some free time this week, get it while it's hot over there on the Peacock.
They had a quote on the screen at the very beginning when they talked about he was the youngest guy signed and the youngest guy fired by WWE, and had a quote that he was uncoachable. That was the Funkin' Dojo, right? That was that period of time. You were there.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's been in and out. They kept trying because of who he's related to. They gave him several opportunities, but yeah, the original time was he still came to the Funkin' Dojo up at the studio in Stamford, and then I think one more time they sent him to, was it Florida Developmental? I know they showed a couple of clips of him in OVW, and I swear to God, you know what? That was probably 2006, right after I was gone, because I never saw Teddy Hart in OVW or in the Davis Arena or any of the whole time I was there. But there were back and forth a couple of times. Yes, youngest hire and youngest fire. Of course, then I don't know whether he's still the youngest or not, because Rene Dupree came along and he was 18. And I'm not sure when Mike Mondo got a developmental deal, because he was only 18 or 19 when he came to our OVW tryout camp. But he's still probably the youngest guy ever fired. And then they brought him back, did something else, and that didn't last long either. He just won't do what he's told, or even what he ought to do instinctually or whatever. And you can't ever figure out what he's going to be into outside the ring.
What did you think as a fan, as a booker, and as a promoter of the various independent clips of Teddy whenever he could actually get booked in this? And there were just cats all over the ring. At several points, Mr. Money was on the top turnbuckle.
Yeah, I mean...
multiple valets, everyone's holding a cat. I mean, what did you think of the whole thing?
Yeah, he's got girls and cats. The thing that came through above all else is that Teddy, in his own mind, and he may be the only person in the world to think this, but he believes that he should have been the biggest star in the wrestling business, and that he is the most talented. And I can't remember one comment that he made, but he was talking about, if I got the chance to show what I can do and transform the wrestling industry and all this stuff, he is convinced and that he is that great. And he's not. Everybody knows that, except Teddy.
He had a wrestling school when he was a teenager. They had footage of that, too.
Yes, and he was part of that. They were going to do a teenage wrestling thing up there in Calgary where all the wrestlers were teenagers and everybody did flips. And then I think before it got too far as a business, somebody realized, well, we'll be fucking civilly liable till the cows come home if anything happens to any of these people. But he's, and I'm not saying he sucks. He's an amazing athlete for all the flips and the springboards and the balance. He's an amazing athlete, period. As far as a wrestler, he can work when he wants to. So can a lot of guys. He's not really tremendously special as a wrestler. He can't fucking cut a promo except if he's, being himself, which is sometimes counterproductive. But so he's, not the worst, not the best, certainly doesn't suck, but my God, there's something going on. You can tell the way he talks, the way he's constantly wired up, whether he's on something or not, and the way that he thinks that, there's something going on mentally that probably needs medication to address.
And if you're a female wrestler out there and you somehow meet him, there's nothing he could do to help your career. Don't fall for that shit. What could he do to help your career ever? When in his career could he have done something to help your career?
I don't know that there's a point in time that, because for the last 10 years, everybody's worked for, he's been on kind of probation. He couldn't help anybody else when they're looking at him sideways like, just fuck up once, motherfucker, we're expecting it.
It's not the last 10 years. It's the last 20-something years. He was in developmental in the late 90s. Where was he steadily employed after that ever?
Cats.
He bounced from one thing to another. He should have been in the Broadway production of Cats.
He was in the chorus line.
He would have gone into business for himself in the middle of the play. It would have been great.